Right, welcome to an episode of Question of the Week. I do apologise about the delay in content on various bits. It's a mixture between new job and working schedule and equipment failures essentially, so I do need to start, investing within that to improve said quality of content. However, we are back on Question of the Week, so obviously this week it is essentially, does the UK suffer from a lack of professionalism within the scene? It's quite a heated topic. I mean, overall, I guess like esports as a whole still lacks professionalism in comparison to kind of other sports, other businesses and the way that they operate, I guess. But specifically, I did want to kind of focus this on why within the UK esports scene, I guess obviously it's always going to be predominantly CS focused, just because the vast majority of people that respond to said Twitter questions are CS based. But we'll kind of get straight into it on this one. So one of the first responses was from the legend that is JT. So obviously he was saying that fold and swap players after poor finishes, to be good you have to play 6 hours of practice, and then within your own time you need to put in more hours as well. I mean, the irony with this one is that I think everyone knows, it's pretty evident in terms of the amount of time you do realistically need to be putting in to try and make it as a pro. And the base minimum is pretty much set as 6 hours within team practice specifically, and everyone knows past that, then obviously you've got to put your own time individually, whether it be DMing, whether it be obviously you've got all these new like Boomio servers and whatnot going up, but just some form of practice that's going to help you individually as well, even when it comes to say like demo watching in your own time, and nowhere near the amount of people that are needed to do it actually do that. So in terms of like the folding swapping after poor finishes, yes, I couldn't agree with it more, but I think the irony of it is, and there's no way that the vast majority of players watching this can really disagree, like that a lot of the time it is down to very, very petty issues why people swap and leave teams, especially after good finishes. Like they'll do really, really well and they'll still have roster swaps and people leaving after it. Now, of course, there are certain situations where it's perfectly legitimate reasons as to why someone's been removed or why that person has left, whether it be time commitment issues, whether it be literally it's just not working out, like they don't necessarily get along with other players in their team, fair enough. But a lot of the time it is genuinely really small things that people just don't look ahead, they don't feel like, they don't see it and think, you know what, this is something that we can work on, this is something that we need to work on as a team. They genuinely look at it and think, well, we'll get rid of this player, we'll get someone else in, and then lo and behold 2 months later you have the same fucking issues. So definitely agree that is a problem. Obviously going forward it's difficult how to necessarily like provide a fix for it, because if at the end of the day it's on you guys as players to essentially put in that effort and kind of have that correct mindset to be able to kind of string it out and make sure that you are putting in the time to fix these issues, rather than replacing someone and having the same issue 2 weeks later. So we'll move on to RixJ, the hero that is Johnny Jones. So basically he's saying that we've gone from like spectators essentially from watching teams like Verygames, obviously when it was at the old I-Series location and when it was at Newbury racecourse, to the main talking point of UK lands not even being about UKCS. To an extent I do agree, like Epic's probably the exclusion where the main focus of that is CS, just sheerly down to the amount of numbers that are in attendance for CS. But especially for I-Series, then yeah, I mean obviously everyone knows the evolution of I-Series, the way it's gone, and obviously it's become very exhibition focused due to financial reasons, and it's one of those that as much as everyone wants to bemoan I-Series for it, but if you put yourself in that position when you're running a business and you can make a shitload more money from it, 99% of people are going to do the exact same thing. As much as sure I would love there to be a lot more focus on esports, but it's a catch-22 in many aspects. But in terms of like the quality of CS and the attraction of getting certain teams, I would say that going back to that sort of time frames, then even though the prize pools might not necessarily have been the biggest, whether it be for like CSS and 1.6, like I do feel as if that overall, because of how the CS scene has grown, like, internationally, or worldwide even, that it's kind of prohibited certain teams from kind of wanting to then go to perform at these events, even if the prize pool was small, sort of thing. But because of there is a very large amount of events, shall we say, that does exist now, and especially within the pro circuit, like, it never stops the vast majority of the time. But yeah, I mean, obviously prize pools is also going to be a huge factor in that, in terms of what attracts teams over to play. So obviously at this point it's very rare. I mean, I-Series gets it a few times when you get the odd couple of EU teams pop over, but even then those EU teams aren't the calibre of teams that you'd kind of want to be going to the event, that's going to kind of attract more spectators, that's going to kind of motivate more players and teams that are participating within it to kind of do better, because of there's that calibre of teams there. Not that they should require that, but it does always have an effect no matter what. So yeah, I fully agree with you there, Johnny Jones. So Aethz, so everyone just wants everyone else to fail in most cases, it seems, rather than supporting each other. There's so much rivalry. So I agree, but I don't necessarily think it's a rivalry. Like, I think very few rivalries actually exist within, like, UK Esports. I think there are certain scenarios where it's usually in around, like, the final places of or the higher end of the tournaments, or the higher end placings of the lands. But the vast majority of the time, the only reason I'd say that's a rivalry is because of the players participating, and more often than not the players that have been in and around those sort of placements for a reasonably long period of time. So you've played against these other teams and players, you've competed against similar players quite frequently. So obviously when one team goes and takes it off of another team, and then you end up in that same scenario 3 months down the line at the next event, and obviously sure, they want to get their revenge, they want to get their own back, but I wouldn't say it's the same sort of rivalry that you get within sports itself. I mean, sports itself, the way that rivalries come around a lot is because of obviously demographics, and there's large proportions of peoples from certain area, e.g. say, like, you look at Manchester versus Liverpool and the rivalries that have come through that, and obviously due to football clubs especially, but obviously there's a huge rivalry just in demographics, just between Liverpool and Manchester anyway. So that does kind of influence it a lot when it comes to rivalries in modern day sports, especially for football, and kind of ones where it is geographically based, from where their teams come from, sort of thing. So I wouldn't necessarily put it down to rivalries, but there are those scenarios where it does occur. But also I'd say a lot of the time it is also, one thing that I would say is especially when it comes to people wanting other teams and players to foul, it's a really, really shit mentality to have. Like, what people don't realise is that by having that one potential team, that one potential org that goes on to do really well for themselves, that will help the rest of the scene 100%. I have no doubts in my mind that by a team actually getting to the point where they're kind of within that tier 2, tier 1 type scenario, where they're actually being able to compete and they're partaking in these tournaments, that will help the rest of the scene grow, because of people are realising that the quality is actually there. But at the same point, no one provides that kind of the motivation, the support within the scene, and it's ridiculous in terms of that we do need to start doing it. Like, at the end of the day, no matter what team it is, even if you've got a personal vendetta against said people, but the chances of being able to grow a lot higher by a certain team or player having success. And a small example of this, and as much as I've probably mentioned it various times before, but you look at what M&M has done within League of Legends, and obviously with recent times having the gaming house and things like that, they've put themselves and UK League of Legends on the map significantly, in order to kind of, because of whether it be the content, whether it be they're the first kind of team for UK League of Legends to have a gaming house, albeit only for a short period of time, but that will help the scene grow overall. And even from my view, like, the amount of new players that are coming into UK League of Legends now that weren't necessarily partaking in it like a year ago, 2 years ago, is very, very high. So I definitely say that we do need to start supporting a lot more people and a lot more teams, but it just falls down onto people's individually shit mentalities. Like, I don't even know how else to say it. We'll move on to JT again, who obviously always says it takes a long time for everyone to be on the same page. People expect to be good straight away. It takes time as a team to learn. So I mean, obviously that's kind of relating back to the first point that you made in terms of folding players and like swapping players essentially after poor finishes. But I mean, I kind of said it anyway on that first point, but like JT has said as well, is it takes time, right? Like, I don't know why people expect within 2 weeks of playing within a certain player that everything's going to be rosy, you're never going to have issues. Like, literally, you just have to look at the pro circuit. That's all you have to do in terms of, there's teams and players that have been playing together for so long, but they have their ups and downs because of it's not always going to be perfect. And it falls down on your own, like, mental strength, essentially, to kind of go through that and progress through it. And people just, they don't have the correct mentality, they don't have the will, they don't have the motivation to actually fix issues. They always think that by changing a player or changing their team is going to be more beneficial for them than actually trying to stick it out in the long run and actually get through issues. Of which I find it amusing, because if you put it in any normal workplace environment, like when you've got issues like that, you're forced to work through it 9 times out of 10. But because of you still have this kind of freedom within esports teams, essentially, that you don't have in a normal workplace, that kind of then leads to people thinking that they can just quit, they can just leave, they can just join another team, and it's something that going forward definitely needs to change. So we'll move on to Walker. So majority of UK elite players have stopped playing, and now we are left with a very young, inexperienced scene. Not a bad thing in the long run. So I agree to an extent, but I mean, realistically, the only like elite players that are going to be within like the history of UKCS are from like 1.6 and Source, of which obviously you've got to think that the amount of time that's passed since then, and bear in mind the kind of stature of what the UK scene has been in terms of like lack of finance in comparison to other nations or the pro circuit overall, it's no surprise that the vast majority of them aren't exactly still playing or still playing at the higher level. But then it even goes into another topic of, would you really class them as elite players? Now obviously there's certain ones that obviously through like CGS era that you can still say yes, they were, and obviously people like Rattlesnake are going to be the best example of this, and obviously Rattlesnake nearly came back essentially with Infused, but it didn't work out recently, which was a shame. So, but even then, I mean, you've still got a huge amount of players that have got good experience within the scene. So I mean, even if you're going for your players like your Immies, your Webbers, your Shikis, your Rezus, your Jacoms, your Pulses, Red Snakes, like there's still a lot of people that have a good amount of experience within the scene. And even then you've got your like players that achievement wise might not have had necessarily the same amount of those, but you still got like your Adam XOs, your Ashes for prime example, that have still been in the scene for a long period of time. But yeah, I mean, in terms of it like not being the bad thing for the long run, then yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we always need like the grassroots to come through and have these younger players start to do well. And I think Radix are probably a good example of that with their lineup at the moment in terms of young players coming through and actually showing that they can do it. So we'll move on to Fyfey. So people's mental attitude is rather than helping players improve, they would rather insult them and watch them fail to feel more skilled. So I mean, I think near enough every response is I agree to an extent, but I do agree to an extent, but especially in terms of people that are insulting them and like watching them foul, I'd still assign that to like the lower echelons of UKCS, where you mostly see that in terms of like people literally shit talking other people significantly, even though they've only like they both didn't get out of groups, or they've literally one team finished 32nd and the other finished 30th, and like they're BMing them because they finished 2 places higher in a shitty tournament. Like it's ridiculous. But at the same point, like I would also account it to, there are a lot of players that are in the higher echelons of the UK scene that are more than happy to genuinely help people out, but it's the way people ask that's the problem. In that a lot of people ask the higher players for advice or help, or what's the best way to do this, what's the best way to get better, how much time should I be putting in, whatever it necessarily is, and they'll get a response a lot of the time, but it'll be like, look, I'm more than happy to help you out, mate, I just can't do it at the moment, very busy, whatever it necessarily is. And then that person that's asked will then get shitty with it, because of obviously they haven't helped them out straight away. And it's just kind of like, the way you ask is the most important thing in this scenario. There are going to be certain people that aren't going to help you out, whether it be due to their own time or whether they just don't fucking want to do it. There's no obligation for them to do it. But there are various players that will. But you have to ask them in the correct way. Like, you can't just expect people just to be giving out all their advice and being like, yeah, these strats, copy us, whatever it necessarily is. And I've seen it various times of the way that people have asked other players for help, and they literally get so shitty when they're not helped straight away, or they're not really going out their way to kind of give advice, sort of thing. Then it's just people's mentalities within the UK scene are just baffling. So Sophie said she thinks people don't know how to represent organisations, which makes orgs not want to pick up teams because they act like kids. Yeah, definitely. Like, I couldn't. It's difficult to say in many ways. Like, as much as I agree, players don't know how to represent orgs, I don't think a lot of orgs know how to represent orgs. So it becomes a bit of a conundrum in that one. But at the same point, there's very basic things, and I'll touch on it a bit, because like one of my strongest points when it comes down to professionalism within the scene is how people act on social media. And I would definitely say that, I mean, I've touched on it previously as well, but players don't really give two shits about the organisations in a lot of scenarios. Like, they just want whatever's the best offer for them. And they know they can get away with a lot of things, but I also don't think that orgs set a precedent combined with, like, provide some form of rule set of being like, look, if you are to join us, this is what we expect. We don't want to see this, we don't want to see that, otherwise you're not getting this, you're not getting that. And that's the way I do think it needs to start going. And obviously with the kind of with contracts becoming more and more important as time goes on, then obviously hopefully we see more of those. But overall, yeah, I mean, I don't think players do know how to represent orgs, but a lot of the time that's down to inexperience. So it is also down on the organisation to help them in that aspect and kind of be like, look, this is what you should really be doing, sort of thing. But it also comes down to, like, players themselves, and even if you're not actually in an organisation at that point, it doesn't give you the excuse to then start acting like a dick and doing certain things that, or saying certain things that make you look bad from a public perspective, because of either way, even if you're not with an org at that time, but orgs are still going to be looking in, and they're going to see your recent tweets, whatever it necessarily is, and they're going to be like, yeah, that, don't like the look of that guy. And it literally, first impressions are everything, right? Like, for a person to make their first impression, it takes 9 seconds. 9 seconds for someone to make an impression, whether it be you're face to face, whether it be you're reading someone's email. Like, you're going to look upon that, 9 seconds. So if I'm going through someone's Twitter page and the last like 5 things they've done is just call other people autistic, within 9 seconds I'm going to see that and be like, no, see you later. So people definitely need to kind of start thinking about, especially what they put on social media and things like that, as to what sort of effect it does actually have. We'll move on to Greeny. So people care too much about what others do outside of the game. Yes, it's probably a point that I've highlighted a lot recently. It's really, really weird. I genuinely can't give a valid explanation as to why people do it. People just love drama. Like, that's the only conclusion I can actually make from it. But look, people are always going to get distracted. People are always going to find things amusing. People are going to find things interesting, myself included. But at the same point, it's just so many people get involved in situations that they don't need to get themselves involved in. Like, just focus on yourself. Like, you're putting in so much, especially these people that are putting in so much time during the day, during the week, during the year. Like, focus on your own fucking game. Stop spending time getting involved in other people's dramas and other people's situations, because of you're then dragging yourself into a group that you don't really want to be assigned in, or it's then going to kind of distract you in other times and other places. Like, just focus on your own game, your own team's game. That's all you literally have to do. Because of it's by doing that, at the end of the day, you're always accountable for your own actions, right? Like, and having that sort of mentality means that if you put in the hard work, realistically you can make it. But if you start doing things and you're too bothered by what other people are saying and what other people are doing, you're not going to get anywhere in the long run. So we've got Naja Torah. So he said, stuff I think separates UK from other nations. From what I've been seeing since he's been in like EPS, not too sure if that's UK EPS, but people are all friendly with each other like a big family, whereas when it's in the UK, People are essentially dicks to each other, and it's difficult to succeed. I'm assuming this is like League of Legends orientated, but to an extent, yes, I do agree. I think, well, I wouldn't say it's perfect in other national scenes for sure. Like, there is a lot of drama that still happens. Maybe in a particular season that you were playing in, and it was all like shiny and all roses. But I mean, I've seen enough drama from other national scenes as well, so I wouldn't say it's perfect everywhere else. But there is a lot of drama that does happen within like UK tournaments like that. In terms of it getting to the point where my phone's just decided to screw itself over. I don't know where I'm at. Alright, yeah, in terms of if it's like, if you aren't in those tournaments, then it's difficult to succeed. For League of Legends, then yes. Because of the kind of format and system that Riot have obviously introduced, then it means you're pushed onto tournaments like EPS, where obviously because of the challenger qualifier spot that you can potentially get by winning EPS, then a lot of people play around that because they view that as the easiest way they can potentially progress and get that potential pro contract within their lives. And look, I'm not saying it's the right way of doing things, but at the end of the day, realistically, for UK players, especially those that aren't like necessarily good enough at that point to kind of be getting an actual like EU spot or a Challenger Series spot, they're gonna have to obviously grind out EPS because of it's the kind of best chance they've necessarily got of being able to kind of get into that stage of the scene. Overall, I would say that, I mean, obviously you've got like UK Masters that have come back for League as well, which is great because of it does create more tournaments, it does give more prize pool, and kind of boost the scene overall. But again, because of obviously the format that Riot have implemented, it becomes very difficult. Whilst obviously games like CS, there's no matter what nation you're in, essentially, like if you're showing up, whether it be in ESEA, whether it be in other little tournaments, like people take notice a lot easier. And obviously it's the same kind of logic, I guess, for League of Legends when it comes to like solo queue, in terms of the higher you are in that challenger or master ladder, like people will take notice of you when you are in those areas and you're playing with other people of the same caliber. I think we've got two left. So Scholar, so it starts with organisations. UK players are so valuable because of the lack of talent, so they get away with anything similar with orgs. A difficult one. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say UK players are so valuable because of the lack of talent. I don't really think that would necessarily be the case. I mean, you can see it just by the fact of X amount of teams that you wouldn't class as the most talented still get funded to land. In terms of it, like starting with the organisations, look, I mean, organisations and players are both accountable for a lack of professionalism, right? A lot of people might not necessarily, especially, look, people are young as well. People have got to remember a lot of the time, so they've not been in certain experiences to really have known any better in a lot of scenarios, shall we say. So it does come down onto that. But yeah, look, it's a collective effort from orgs, from players, from tournament organisers. Everyone needs to kind of collectively work together in order to make the scene grow overall. Last but not least, we've got Miami. So compared to this scene to Spain, Finland, half of Eastern Europe and other predominant scenes, we have some of the worst levels of professionalism with our players. Yes and no. Like again, I wouldn't say other national scenes are perfect. I do feel like UK players feel like they do have a sense of entitlement that they deserve for one reason or another, that they should be getting more than what they are when they've done literally fuck all to warrant it. Like, even at the stage that we're in now within the UK scene, where obviously because of the things like Gfinity Elite Series, where it's kind of accelerated the growth of the scene in terms of providing salaries for players, and it's kind of leading other teams that aren't necessarily involved in the Elite Series to kind of compete with that. Look, at the end of the day, when it comes to the professionalism side of it, everyone needs to kind of give themselves a big kick up the arse, whether it be social media, whether it be just the way that you act, whether it be... I'd also say, like, one thing that I'm actually really going to kind of get on a stringent for this bit now is especially when it comes to LANs, and the amount of times you go to LANs and you see players that are absolutely fucking trolleyed, like flat out drunk, every single night of the tournament, and then they're coming in the next day, and obviously they haven't got much sleep due to bad formatting or the scheduling, whatever it necessarily is, and then they're left to a point where obviously they're not in the correct state of mind to be able to perform to the best of their ability. Now, the way I look at this, and it absolutely fucking infuriates me, I have no problem with people going to LANs and having a drink, you know what I mean, especially, and if you get knocked out, sure, go get fucking wasted, mate, no problems with it, but for all the time, especially when you're representing an organisation and that organisation has paid good money for you to attend the event, especially even more so when they're salarying you. Like, if you're going to these events and even on the first night you're getting absolutely blackout drunk and come the next day you're just not in that best state of mind, and obviously then you go get knocked out, like that's just shitting on the organisation you represent. Literally, like, they're sending you to an event once every 3 months, it near enough works out, right? Like, maybe slightly less than that, but how do you expect people to continue to support people and even provide more if you're not respecting what they provide for you? Like, if you can't go once every 3 months without getting blackout drunk until you either win the tournament or get knocked out, that to me is a huge lack of professionalism and a lack of respect in a lot of ways, and people genuinely need to kind of sort that one out, because it absolutely infuriates me when I see it. We'll move on to the social media use, and this one's been kind of spoken about a bit in various points, and one of the best examples for this, I would say, is Optic, in terms of the way they try and guideline their players of what you can and can't do on social media. Now, I don't think a lot of organisations genuinely put enough pressure or have much influence on their players when compared to how much they should have, or what they should necessarily be doing in terms of what people say and do on social media, because of, especially when it comes to, obviously, first you've got brand representation, right? In any normal scenario, how many times have you heard about some guy that's been sacked because of he's posted something shitty on social media about the company that he represents? And obviously, because of he's been doing that and slandering the brand that he's actually working for, they can't accept that, so obviously he has to be removed. Now, organisation-wise, that isn't, like, and within esports, that isn't something that you see very often, and people do get away with blue murder when it comes to things like social media. And I'm not even necessarily talking about derogatory towards their own organisation that they're representing, but whether it be to others, whether it be to other people, like, you're literally looking down one person's, like, Twitter feed, and kind of, like I said earlier, they're literally just calling every other person autistic every 2 seconds, or just flaming everyone else, and it's just, or like, captain negativity, and it's just kind of like, whether it be that organisation or whether it be investors looking in, and don't get you wrong, people, like, for one reason or another, don't think that this actually happens, and you are very, very narrow-minded if that is the case. Investors will look at social media, they will look at it and see kind of the trends, because of esports as a whole has grown so much because of the effects of social media. Like, there's no shadow of a doubt, it has grown a lot because of the effect social media has on it, and because of the global audience that it can attract. Now, if you're telling, so obviously sponsors and investors, whether it be individually, whether it be companies that are looking in and they're doing their research and they're scanning through, and like someone's sent a proposal their way being like, look, we want your investment, we want you to come sponsor us, we can offer you this, that and the other, these are our social media channels, these are our players. And they're going to do their research, obviously they're not just going to hand out money free willy, so then they decide, okay, we're going to, like, look through people's social medias, look through the organisation's social media, and all they see is just shit. And it's like, how do you honestly think that people are going to come in and invest when you do those sort of things? And there was, I really can't remember, there was an organisation that I saw the other day, and this is going to trigger me because I don't have it. It was CS related, and they just qualified for, I can't remember what tournament it was either, I'm absolutely useless. But the organisation, like, they put on their Twitter, they were like, fuck yeah, just qualified for this, that and the other. I'm like, I get the point, you're happy, but you can't be saying things like that from an organisation, a professional organisation's social media account. You just can't be doing things like that. Because of, at the end of the day, from sponsors, like for endemic sponsors, sure, they can potentially understand it because they're in and around and they're involved in the scene, so they know what goes on. For non-endemics that see that sort of thing are going to be like, what the actual hell is going on here? Like, who runs their social media? So, look, social media is probably one of the biggest things that I will focus on when it comes down to professionalism. People do just genuinely need to think before you kind of submit your post, your tweet, whatever it necessarily is. Orgs need to kind of set some form of guidelines, like even when it comes to swearing on Twitter, and I myself am at fault for this. I do it now and again when it's just completely unnecessary. Like, the vast majority of the time when someone decides to swear on Twitter, or any form of other social media, like YouTube, myself, I've probably sworn like 4 times within this whole video as well. And realistically, the only reason I'm doing it is just because of its kind of second nature, the way that I'm speaking with certain things, and I'm just talking to a camera like it's your best mate. But realistically, if I was to kind of plan out everything I'm going to say in the video, then I wouldn't have any swear words within it. But because it's freestyle in the video, then obviously it just kind of comes in second nature. On top of obviously social media use, we've been over certain things in terms of it being like a collective effort from a professionalism standpoint. The way that people treat events, the way that people act when they go to events is something that needs to change. Even when it comes to tournaments overall, and the way that people act within said tournaments needs to change. And I'm glad that like tournaments like UK Masters especially are putting in penalties for certain things when people misbehave or do things they shouldn't be doing. I think that is something that is very much needed, so I hope to see that across the board. Other than that, of course, we could probably sit here for hours and hours and hours speaking about God knows what other things relating to professionalism, whether it be tournament organisers, organisations, players, however you want to say it. But I don't want this video to go on for 7 or decades. So there may be various kind of follow-ups when it comes to professionalism, to be fair, but it'll probably be individual talking points. So I might do an episode of SimplySed on certain professionalism related topics. But other than that, obviously remember to like, comment, subscribe, hate, whatever it is you feel like doing today, my friends. And obviously I will see you soon, so peace. Why won't you stop recording? Fuck.